Imagine a sophisticated millionaire stuck in the middle of nowhere, depending on the help of a mechanic from a simple workshop. Louisa, used to glamour, never imagined that Gabriel, a man so different from her, could make her question everything about her life. But what starts as a simple car repair turns into an unexpected connection until she discovers the dark secret he's trying to hide. Will Gabriel's past destroy what they are building together, or will Louisa be able to see beyond appearances and believe in his redemption? Get ready for an unlikely love story, exciting twists and proof that sometimes it's in the broken pieces that we find what really matters. The sound of the engine sputtering was the first sign that this would not be an ordinary day for Louisa. She stopped the car on the side of the road, looking at the deserted road in front of her. The scorching sun of Serra Azul made the scenario even more desperate. After a few futile attempts to restart the car, she let out a frustrated sigh. "Great, this is exactly what I needed today," he murmured as he searched for his cell phone in his bag. But the screen displayed something worse. No signal. She looked around, the empty landscape only making the situation more irritating. Really, universe? Was it really necessary? Before he could panic, an old pickup truck appeared in the distance, kicking up dust. Louisa, without much choice, waved at the vehicle. He stopped next to her, and out stepped a man with worn jeans and a calm smile. "Do you need help?" he asked, resting his hands on his hips. "Are you a mechanic?" she replied, looking suspicious. "When fate dictates, I'm the one you need," he said, approaching the car. "I'm Gabriel, and you?" "Louisa," she replied shortly, still assessing the situation. "Can you solve this?" Gabriel smirked and bent down to examine the engine. Meanwhile, Louisa crossed her arms, trying not to show the discomfort of depending on a stranger. "Problem with the fuel pump," he said, standing up. "I can fix it, but it will take a while." "And how much does it cost?" she asked, already taking out her wallet. "Calm down, madam. First we fix it, then we think about the price," joked Gabriel. Louisa narrowed her eyes. "If you're going to call me madam, I at least hope you do a good job." Gabriel gave a low laugh. "You can leave it. It will be as good as the coffee here in the region, strong and effective." While he was working, Louisa began to observe him more closely. There was something about Gabriel's relaxed manner that intrigued her. He seemed to do everything calmly, as if nothing could get him off track. "Do you always help strangers on the road?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Only when they seem desperate," he replied, winking with slight teasing. "Desperate? I'm far from that," replied Louisa, shaking her head. Gabriel laughed and went back to work. "Of course, madam. Just no cell phone signal, broken car, and in the middle of nowhere." After a while, he stood up and wiped his hands on his pants. "Ready? It's like new." "Finally," replied Louisa, opening her wallet. "How much was it?" Gabriel shook his head. "You don't need to pay now. If you want, stop by my workshop, Vila dos Cedros. Just ask for me." She hesitated. "Are you trusting me to actually get through there?" "I'm sure it will. People always pay their debts, one way or another," he replied, smiling enigmatically. Back at the wheel, while driving back to the city, Louisa couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. Something about Gabriel was different. His relaxed manner and easy smile intrigued her. It was just a nice mechanic, nothing more, she muttered to herself, trying to shake the thought away. But as she walked down the road, she couldn't deny that his smile was etched in her mind. Louisa hesitated before entering the small space that Gabriel called the workshop. It was simple, with worn walls and tools organized on makeshift shelves. Country music played in the background, mixing with the sound of laughter and conversation. Gabriel was leaning over the engine of an old car, but he looked up when he saw her. "Our madam is back. I thought you weren't going to show up," he said with a mischievous smile. "I had to resolve my debt, didn't I?" she replied, crossing her arms and trying to hide a smile. "Well, if you're here, you must be willing to see my humble world," Gabriel joked, gesturing to the workshop. "What do you think?" "Rustic," said Louisa, with a carefully neutral expression. Gabriel laughed. "It's the best compliment I've heard today. Come, I'll show you what we do around here." As he talked about the different projects he was developing in the workshop, Louisa began to notice something interesting. Gabriel didn't just fix cars, he seemed genuinely passionate about what he did. There was a sparkle in his eyes as he explained the technical details, and she couldn't help but feel captivated. "You really like this, don't you?" she asked. "More than you know," he replied, looking directly at her. "Fixing things is my specialty, sometimes even people." Louisa laughed, but the comment stayed in her mind. She realized there was a depth to Gabriel that went beyond his laid-back appearance. Later, as they watched a customer leave with his repaired car, Gabriel surprised her with an invitation. "Since you're here, why don't you try the local coffee? There's a little place right there that makes incredible cheese bread." Louisa raised an eyebrow. "Are you inviting me to eat cheese bread?" "I promise it will change your life," he replied with a wink. Unable to resist his carefree tone, she accepted. In the small cafe, between cups of strong coffee and warm cheese bread, the conversation flowed easily. Gabriel made her laugh with his stories, and Louisa began to feel that she was discovering a completely different world from the one she knew. When they returned to the workshop, Gabriel commented, "Well, I think you now understand why I wouldn't trade this for anything." "Yes, you have something special here," admitted Louisa, "and oddly enough, the cheese bread was worth it." Gabriel laughed, adjusting the tools on the table. "I'm glad you took advantage of it. Who knows, maybe next time you'll be ready to get your hands dirty." Louisa shook her head, smiling. "We'll see." As he left, he realized that Gabriel had planted something in his mind, a new perspective, and she couldn't deny that she wanted to know more about him. The sound of the telephone interrupted the silence in the workshop. Gabriel answered quickly, moving away to a corner while speaking in a low voice. Louisa, who had decided to come back for another coffee and conversation, noticed the change in his behavior. He seemed tense, something that didn't fit with the carefree Gabriel he had known. "Is there a problem?" she asked when he hung up. "Nothing else, just a difficult customer," he replied, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Louisa didn't want to press, but the feeling that something was wrong remained. While Gabriel was working on a car, she looked around the workshop and noticed a small bulletin board. Among the papers, a note caught his attention. "Call me as soon as you can. Urgent matter." There was an unknown number, but the tone seemed alarming. Later, while Gabriel was going out to get a piece, Louisa noticed an open envelope on the table. Inside was a document that appeared to be a court notice. She hesitated, but eventually read enough to understand that Gabriel had debts related to an incident years ago. When Gabriel returned, she couldn't hide her uneasiness. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" he asked directly. Gabriel stopped, clearly surprised. "What do you mean?" "I saw the note and the envelope. It seems like there's something you're not telling." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I knew it was going to happen sooner or later." "So why hide it? I thought you were different," said Louisa, crossing her arms. Gabriel took a deep breath before speaking. "My past is not something I am proud of. I've done things I regret, and I'm trying to make amends. But it's not easy to get out of a hole when the world insists on pulling you back." "Like what?" Louisa pressed. "Debts, bad associations. I tried to fix my life, but it's not always possible to erase everything," he replied, his tone sincere. For a moment, Louisa was silent. There was a raw honesty about Gabriel that disarmed her, but the fear that she was getting involved with someone who wasn't what they seemed was also real. "What now?" she asked, trying to hide the confusion in her voice. "Now, I try to be better, and I hope that's enough," he said, looking into her eyes. Louisa didn't respond, but she knew she would need to decide if she was willing to trust him. Louisa was sitting in the cafe next to the workshop, twirling a spoon in her cup of cold coffee. The weight of what he had discovered about Gabriel hung in his mind. She was torn between her growing trust in him and her fear that his past might complicate her own life. When Gabriel entered the cafe, he seemed more serious than usual. He walked to the table and sat down in silence, as if he knew that Louisa was about to say something important. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" she began bluntly. Gabriel sighed. "I knew that sooner or later you would want answers, and I don't blame you." "Then give me a reason not to leave now," said Louisa, trying to hide the emotion in her voice. "Because I'm not the same man who made those mistakes. Louisa, all I've done since then is try to fix things. It's not fair that my past defines me forever." She watched him for a few seconds before responding. "But you understand that it's hard to trust someone who hasn't been honest from the start, don't you?" "I understand," he replied, his gaze fixed on hers. "But you've already trusted people who didn't deserve it. I'm just asking for a chance to show that I deserve it." The silence between them was interrupted by the waiter, who left the bill on the table. Gabriel took it quickly and paid before Louisa could protest. "That doesn't solve everything, you know," she commented, but there was a lightness in her tone. "I know, but it's a start," he replied with a shy smile. That night, Louisa stayed awake, reflecting on the conversation. Gabriel had been transparent, something few people in his life had the courage to be. But there was still the question of how this might affect his reputation and the world of appearances in which he lived. The next day, she returned to the workshop. Gabriel had his back turned, working on a motorbike, but he noticed his presence immediately. "You're back," he said, without hiding the relief in his voice. "I still don't know what to do," confessed Louisa, "but I don't think I'll find out if I just walk away." Gabriel approached, wiping his hands on the cloth. "Thank you for that. I know it won't be easy, but I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm worth it." She smiled slightly. "I hope you're serious, because I'm terrible at giving second chances." "I'm not expecting a third, so I'm going to make it count," he said with a determined look. The days that followed were full of challenges. Gabriel was determined to show that he could leave the past behind, and Louisa, even though she was still cautious, began to support him in a practical way. She helped him organize the workshop's accounts and suggested ideas to attract more customers, something Gabriel accepted with surprise and gratitude. "Do you really think social media ads will help?" asked Gabriel with a suspicious smile. "Trust in me. If the region's cheese bread won my heart, I can convince anyone that you are the best mechanic in Serra Azul," she replied, winking. Between laughter and hard work, the two began to create something together, not just in the workshop, but also in their lives. Gabriel, now more open, told details of his mistakes and how he ended up on a dark path. He had fallen in with the wrong crowd while trying to support his family after his father's death. Accumulated debts forced him to make decisions that he still deeply regretted. "And now?" asked Louisa as the two walked through the city square. "Now I'm paying off everything." "Slowly, but in the right way," replied Gabriel, shaking her hand. "And I want you to know that if this makes you uncomfortable, I understand. I said I'm terrible at second chances, right? But I think I'm starting to do better at it," Louisa joked with a smile. That night, as Gabriel was closing the shop, an unexpected customer showed up. He was a young man looking for a job. He explained that he needed money to help his sick mother, and Gabriel saw a reflection of himself in the boy. Without hesitation, he offered him a position as an assistant. "Don't you think you're taking on too much?" asked Louisa, observing the scene. "Maybe," replied Gabriel, "but if someone had given me a chance when I needed it, things could have been different." Louisa remained silent, admiring his courage. At that moment, I knew I had made the right decision by staying. Months later, the workshop was flourishing. Gabriel and Luisa opened a community space next to the business, offering free mechanics classes for at-risk young people. During the inauguration event, Gabriel held the microphone with Luisa by his side. A while ago, I thought my past was what would define me forever. But today I realize that true strength lies in how we choose to build the future. And I couldn't have done it without this incredible woman by my side. Applause filled the space, and Luisa felt a slight wave of emotion. "You know you owe me another cheese bread for that statement, don't you?" she joked in Gabriel's ear. He laughed and held her hand. "I must, and I intend to pay it back with interest." As the sun set in Serra Azul, the two looked at the horizon, knowing that together they could face any challenge. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And that was all that mattered.